Well, the land between. That's not just our series, that's the seasons of life that we all walk through at various points, don't we? This land between is the space between what we knew before and what we hope for next, but you're not there yet. It's that liminal space when the trapeze artist swings and lets go of the bar, but the next one's not there yet, right? That's the land between. The land between is when you're sitting in the airport waiting for your delayed flight. The land between is when you're in the waiting room waiting for the doctor to finally come, right? The land between is a season of worry, of wondering, of wandering. It's a season of despair sometimes. It's a season of a dry, a desert season that seems, and hope just seems far away. It's the heartbreak of a relationship that ends sooner than you thought it would. It's the loss and the grief that you just can't understand. The land between is that job loss that you never saw coming either when they eliminated your position and you don't know what's next or how you're going to pay the bills. The land between is when you're crying out to God for that heartfelt prayer and you just are getting no answer, you think. The land between is a profoundly disorienting space, isn't it? And yet we all find ourselves there at various points in life, don't we? Every single one of us. We can't avoid it. And a few weeks back, I introduced you to a man named Moses. And Moses, if you remember, he was an Israelite, born an Israelite, raised in Pharaoh's household as kind of an adoptive prince of Egypt, right? That is until he kills an Egyptian slave driver who's beating a fellow Israelite. And then from that point, Cliff Note version, he runs away, enters the witness protection program, gets a new family, starts shepherding instead of princing. And this becomes his new reality, right? And you think that his story would be over, but God redeems all things, doesn't he? And so what does God do? Well, through an amazing string of events, God directed him back to Egypt and used him to deliver the Israelites from their bondage. If you don't know the story, we'll go through it in the weeks to come. And as these Israelites exodus from Egypt, well, they don't waltz right into the promised land. Instead, they wander in the land between for 40 years. And this is the journey we're going to take with them over the coming months together. As we are in our land between, meeting in our own tabernacle, in our wilderness season together, kind of in the unsettledness of this renovation season, as we all have our own land between seasons and concerns and worries and struggles and wanders through a dry desert season in our own lives, we're going to take this journey with the Israelites. We're going to glean some lessons from what they are going through and experiencing that we can apply to our lives, so we also can become a little bit more like God through those seasons. And here's what we're going to find, is that even in the dry desert seasons of our lives, there can be incredible transformation in seasons of transition. You ever notice that? There can be incredible transformation in seasons of transition. We don't always get that though, do we? Because when we end up in a dry desert season, all we're thinking about is how do I get to the other side of it? How can I make this done as soon as possible? But my friends, the desert season, the wandering, the land between can be an incredibly powerful time. It can be an incubator for growth. And we don't always think about the desert that way, but that's the reality. Even in the desert, there's the opportunity for life to bloom. It's dormant, but it's there. There's this phenomenon that maybe you've seen before. I'll put a picture up here. It's called the super bloom. And it happens only in certain deserts in California and Arizona, in South Africa. But this super bloom happens when in this dry, barren desert, all these flower seeds that have been laying dormant in this barren land, after a really wet winter, the circumstances are just right where they bloom all at the same time. And all of a sudden, this dry, barren land is transformed into something beautiful. I believe that God can do the same thing in us when we journey through the land between. When we wander through the wilderness, when we're stuck in this dry desert season, I believe that's what God can do in us. And so today, as we start this journey together, we're going to look at Moses' encounter with God, and we're going to see the start of this super bloom in his life that leads to the same in the Israelites, right? And here's what we're going to find. Is that who we believe God to be determines who we'll become in our land between seasons, okay? Say that with me, okay? Who we believe God to be determines who will become in our own land between seasons. This is what we're going to find out in Moses. If you're not there yet, flip to Exodus chapter 2, second book of the Bible, second chapter of the book. Easy to find. If you don't know where still to find it, use table of contents. No shame in it, all right? Exodus chapter 2 is where we're going to pick it up. And we're picking up the story now. It's after Moses has traded the palace for the desert. He's traded his crown for a shepherd's staff. And Moses was about 40 when he fled Egypt. And now it's been about another 40 years. So dude's pushing 80 at this point. I'm pretty sure he did not have the six-pack abs that Disney gave him in Prince of Egypt. You know what I'm talking about? Pretty sure he didn't have them anymore, right? And so here's Moses pushing 80, and yet he gets a new opportunity. He has no plans of ever returning to Egypt. Whatever problems, whatever suffering, whatever struggle they have, it's not his concern anymore. He doesn't care so much, but God does. And watch what God says. We get his revelation here in verse 23, chapter 2. It says, during that long period, remember, about 40 years that he was out there, the king of Egypt died. And the Israelites, they groaned in their slavery and cried out to God. And their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. And God heard their groaning. He remembered his covenant with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, these fathers of the faith. And so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. I love this verse right here, these verses. Picks up decades later. And we don't often realize just how long these Israelites were struggling and suffering through their slavery. You know, it runs through about 80 years in about 2 pages right here. So we can miss how long these Israelites suffered and struggled through this season. But they struggled for many, many, many decades. And even before they entered the land between of their wilderness wandering, these Israelites endured the land between of slavery and harsh labor. And so they cried out to God, and God heard their cry. Did you see it there? Verse 24, God heard their groaning. He heard their cries for help, their petitions, their protests, their prayers. They all made it up to God. He heard every one of them. And I'm normally a New International Version guy. That's the version I always read to you from. But I love how the English Standard Version, the ESV, captures this verse. Let me read it to you because it makes it so crystal clear, God's responses. You're given 4 actions of God here. 4 actions. See if you can catch them, okay? I put them in bold if you're one of the slow ones in the room, okay? Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God. God heard their groaning. God remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. Do you see that? So clear. God heard, God remembered, God saw, and God knew. That's what happens with God. See, sometimes when we linger in the land between seasons of life, when we're suffering and struggling, when we're waiting and wondering, we question if God notices or even cares. You ever been there? But I think this verse right here is so beautiful because it tells us the truth about God, that he's present, that he cares, that he notices. Nothing escapes his attention. When you're walking through your own wilderness journey, your own desert seasons, your land between, I think it's incredibly helpful to remember a couple things, to realize that God hears. He hears your cries for help. You're not just lifting up prayers to the ceiling and wondering if anybody's out there. No, God hears your prayers, every single one of them. They make it to his heart. God remembers. And when it says God remembers, we can read like, wait, so I thought God knew. God forgot? No, God didn't forget. God does not forget. What remember means here is not that God forgot something, but that he's calling it to mind, calling it to the surface. God did not ever forget his promise to these forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that this forever promise, this covenant he made, that he would make them into a great nation and deliver them into the promised land. Never once forgot it, but now he's bringing it to the surface. Do you see it? He hears, he remembers, God sees. God sees his attention and active participation in our lives. It's there. He's not an unfeeling, distant deity. Some of us go through life acting like God is out there somewhere, but he is totally unconcerned with what's going on in my life. That is not true, my friends. God sees what you're going through. Elsewhere in Scripture, he's called the God who sees, El Roi in Hebrew. The God who sees, he takes notice of whatever it is we're walking through. God hears, he remembers, he sees, God knows. God knows. And this knowledge is a personal knowledge. It's an intimate knowledge, okay? This is knowledge that activates a response. This isn't just okay, cool, good to know. No, this is intimate. I care about it deeply. I'm going to respond to it kind of knowledge. He hears, he remembers, he sees, he knows. That is the truth about our God, amen? That is the truth about our God. And whatever desert season, whatever wandering you're going through, whatever struggle you're enduring, whatever land between you find yourself in, you need to realize that God hears your cry for help, that God remembers his promises, that God sees you, and that he knows what you're going through. And he's moved to respond, not always the way we want him to, but he will respond. And watch how he responds right here to these Israelites. He calls out Moses out of his pseudo-retirement, right? Exodus 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest in Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness. He came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Maybe you've heard this story before. And Moses saw that while the bush was on fire, it didn't burn up. And so Moses thought, well, I'm going to go over check this thing out. See why this strange sight, this bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses. Moses. Pretty sure God's voice was booming a little more than mine does. Need some special effects for that or something. Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Read those words with me. Here I am. This is Moses' response. It's this open-handed, here I am, as he encounters God in this burning bush. In Hebrew, it's hineni, here I am. It's a posture of readiness, of availability, of humble willingness to follow God wherever he calls us. And we saw it a few weeks ago when we looked at Abraham and saw that Abraham, when God asks, do you love the giver or the gift more? Abraham says, here I am. When Samuel, the prophet, hears the Lord's voice for the first time, a few times he doesn't know what to do with it, and eventually he says, here I am, Lord. Hineni. When Isaiah, the prophet, is called to go out to Israel, God says, who am I going to send? And he says, here I am, send me. And now we find Moses with the same word on his lips, hineni, here I am. This is not pointing out like, right here, God, like standing. It's not geography, it's his heart posture. It's open-handed. It's saying, I'm open, I'm willing to do what you call me to do. That's what he's saying right here. I saw this word for the first time in the scriptures about 25 years ago, and it's become a prayer for me over my life to say, here I am, Lord, send me, use me wherever, however you want to. Is that a prayer you're willing to pray today? Even if it leads you into the land between and the unknown or the uncertainty. That's what Moses prays. He says, hineni, here I am. See, Moses is in this reality right here. He says, here I am. Not only were the Israelites already in their land between season in slavery, longing, waiting, crying out for help. But Moses himself, you find here, is actually in his land between season as well, still wondering what his life was going to be all about. What Moses didn't understand is that those last 40 years of shepherding sheep in the wilderness were God preparing him to shepherd his people through their 40 years in the wilderness. And now he steps up and he says to God, here I am. But he didn't really know who he was, who he's talking to, or what he's being called to. Verse 5, do not come any closer, God says. Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. who went before him, whom God had made promises to. He says, at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned. I care about their suffering. Same words that we just saw a minute ago. Did you catch that? See, hear, concerned about their suffering. So I have now come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land flowing with milk and honey. Everybody's like, sign me up, right? That sounds pretty good, right? Verse 9, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me and my ears. Same words he just expressed. And I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And so now go, Moses, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. I got to imagine Moses along the way is like, cool, okay, oh, that sounds great. Oh, whoa, me? This is his reaction here, right? Moses finds out that this is God himself, like magnificently, mysteriously manifesting his presence right there before him. Can you imagine that? Just imagine this. See, here's what I catch in this section of scripture is that in these land between moments, in these seasons of struggle and suffering, and these lingering in the land between these times of uncertainty, we will always be confronted with questions of who God is and who we believe God to be. Every time. When I was struggling as a teenager trying to figure out my identity, I had to grapple with the question of who God is. Is he true? Is he real? And is he to be trusted? Like, should I give my life to him? Because there's a lot of other things calling at me, right? And when I was applying for jobs and not getting much responses that I was hoping for, I had to grapple with who I believed God to be. Is he to be trusted? Did he really call me to ministry? Or is this my confirmation that, maybe not, Like, is he going to take care of my needs? When Krista and I have journeyed through really rough patches in our marriage, I have to ask the question of who do I believe God to be? Is he truly a God that redeems even the most broken of situations? When I've lost loved ones on the surgery table, suddenly, or through long, torturous journeys with cancer, I have to confront the question of who I believe God to be. Do I believe that he is still good? That he is still loving, that he is still powerful, even when I don't get to see it in the answer I'm asking for. And when I'm caught in the web of my sin again, can I get an amen to that one? Yeah, okay, you guys are like, I don't know, can I do that in church? But when I'm caught in the web of my sin again, I have to grapple with the question of who do I believe God to be? Is he really as gracious and forgiving as he says he is? Because I've been down this road. Every time we find ourselves in a land between season, we come to grips with, and it reveals and it confronts who we believe God to be. And this is the reality of every land between season we walk through. And right here, God reveals who he is, his true character to Moses. He says, I am. Moses said, here I am. Moses comes back, says, I am. I am faithful to my promises. I am the God who was and is to will forever be. I am the God who is always faithful. I am the God who hears and remembers and sees and knows. And I am sending you back to Egypt, Moses. And Moses is like, I don't know about that one. He has this little concern. And let's be honest, let's give Moses a little grace here, because we might sit in judgment of this and be like, come on, Moses, that's a burning bush. Wouldn't you be questioning a lot of things in your life? If you see a burning bush that's not really burning and you hear a voice coming from it, I'd be asking a lot of questions about my life at this point, including what was in those mushrooms I ate last night. You know what I mean? Because I'm seeing and hearing some funny things, like what was in that marsala? That's what I would be asking. And Moses has to confront this. He struggles with it. He's uncertain. And so Moses has a bit of a crisis. Verse 11, Moses says, but Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites up out of Egypt? So Moses now goes from here I am to who am I, right? You ever done that? You ever moved from here to here, right? And you don't just question God, but you question who you are and what you have to offer in the midst of that uncertainty. That's where Moses is in this moment. He's questioning God and if he has what it takes to do what God is calling him to do. And so he starts making excuses. Any other excuse makers out here? Yeah, just me. You guys have just such a great way of making me feel so alone every Sunday. And so he makes excuses and he asks some of these questions. I'll put them up on the screen. He says, who am I that I should go? Verse 13 or verse 11, right? And then he says, who should I say sent me? Like, what's your name anyways, God? Verse 13. Excuse number 3, he says, what if they don't believe me? Chapter 4, verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 10, he says, but I don't talk too good, God. And God's like, okay, that's cute. And chapter 4, verse 13, he says, can you please just send somebody else? Like, that's what he comes to. 5 excuses, every single one of them a commentary, not just on what he believed about himself, but what he believed about God. Have you ever noticed that? Not just commentary about what he believed about himself, but what he believed about God. And here's the point. You will always have an identity crisis until you recognize God's identity. You will never know who you are until you know who he is. You will always doubt yourself until you're confident in who God is. And see, God responds to every single one of these responses, these excuses. He responds to every single one with a reminder of who he is. He doesn't give Moses a little pep talk and a little boost of self-esteem. No, he says, let me tell you about myself. And so Moses says, well, who am I that I should go? And God says, I will go with you. And when Moses asked, well, who should I tell him sent me? God gives him his profound, his personal, his powerful name, introduces himself to Moses. When Moses asks and says, well, what if they don't believe me? God demonstrates his power through these miraculous signs. Throw that staff on the ground, it becomes a snake. Reach your hand and it comes out leprosy and puts it back in and it's healed. Like he shows him his power. And when Moses reminds God that he's not a very good public speaker, God's like, do you know who created your mouth? And when Moses says, please just send somebody else, he says, listen, I will go with you. My presence will be with you the entire way. God never wanted or expected Moses to be confident in his own abilities. He wanted him to be confident in God's abilities. And every time Moses came up with an excuse of why he couldn't do what God was calling him to do, God didn't say, no, really, you can do it, right? You can be anything you want to be. No, that's an American lie, okay? Instead, what he says is, I'll take care of you. You know who you ultimately trust? It's me. That's what God says. You will always be wondering, who am I until you meet the great I am. You will always be wondering, who am I until you meet the great I am. You will always have a crisis of identity, of self-doubt, until you find your identity and your security in God and God alone. That is the reality for every single one of us. I don't care what age, what stage of life you are in. That is true of all of us. And so Moses opens the conversation, says, here I am. And then God says, well, I am the faithful God of your fathers. And he says, well, who am I? And then God says, okay, let me really introduce myself to you now. Look at this, verse 14. Verse 14, Moses says to God, suppose I go, they don't believe me. And God comes back, verse 14, he says, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites, I am has sent me to you. So God now introduces himself, this profound name of God, Yahweh, I am who I am. Some read this and think, is God just trying to skirt the question here? Is he like, dude, I am who I am? Like, what do you want? Like, no, that's not God's heart. That's not his posture. God's posture is saying, I am who I am. Yahweh, this is the holy name of God. You see how it's in all caps in your translation? Probably. That's because this is the holy name of God. He's powerful. He always was, always will be. He is always present with us. He says, I am. His person, his character, his power, his authority, his reputation are bound up in this holy name. And here's what I see is that God desires to be known by us. And you can trust him. And there are times when we journey through the land between where it feels very much like God has hidden his face from us. It feels like you can't trust him and you don't even know where he is or if he's there with you. Can you trust God? But God longs to be known by us, longs to walk with us, and that's enough for Moses. And so what Moses does from here is he leaves Mount Horeb with a clear calling and a confirmation of God's presence with him. He heads back to Egypt as God's ambassador to free those captives. And in the months ahead, we're going to get to see Moses and these Israelites endure all kinds of challenges along the way. But here's what happens, is along the way, Moses becomes a little bit more like God. Becomes a little more humble, a little more trusting, a little more faithful as he goes. Not perfect, but in process. Because Moses, when he finally sees God for who he truly is, the great I am, the one who sees, who hears, who remembers, who knows, and he sees this God journeying with him through his land between, this becomes the driving influence in his formation. There's something of a super bloom that happens in Moses' life as you watch it unfold in the months to come. And see, we all become something different in our desert seasons. Maybe you've seen that. You've been through a hard time, a divorce, a loss of someone you love, a job loss, whatever it is. All of us become something different through that experience. The question of who we become comes back to who we believe God to be. And who we believe God to be determines who you'll become in the land between. You can fill that in on your notes. See this with me. Who you believe God to be will determine who you become in the land between. If you believe that God is aloof and absent, he's uncaring, then you're going to become pretty bitter. And you're going to struggle through that season. But if you believe that God is present, that he's the great I am, who sees, who hears, who remembers, who knows everything that you are going through, then you are going to become something beautiful as God remakes you and reforms you in that season. That's the invitation for every single one of us. We don't get to control when we end up in the land between, do we? We don't get to control it, but we do get to control our response in it. We get to control how we move forward, where we go from here, how we respond, and who we believe God to be. So I'm going to invite the band back up just to help us wrap our time in gratitude this morning. And as we launch into this series and this season, as we journey through the land between in the months to come, here's my challenge to you, is that if you struggle to see who God is, his character, his goodness, his faithfulness to his promises, as you struggle through different seasons of life, here's my challenge. Read through the book of Exodus and Numbers, see this picture and the character of God as we go, so you can bring those prayers back to him and say, God, I don't get this right now. I'm struggling right now, but you can see who he is. And if you're here and you don't have a saving, growing relationship with Jesus Christ today, or maybe something's stirring on your heart and you want to come and pray with somebody, even during this song or at the end of this song, as we wrap up the service, come up, pray with somebody up to the sides. We'd love to meet with you, pray with you. We have a God who sees, who hears, who remembers, who knows. He is the great I am. Amen? Hey, let's stand to our feet, church, and let's respond back to God now.